Hi everyone, welcome to Economics 2B. So today we're dealing with activity 4, 5 and 6 of the tutorial worksheet. So this is basically section C, which is economic efficiency. And what is most important in this one, or what I would like to actually discuss with you before I can even start with the activities, it is basically important for you to know the allocative rules and also know how to apply the allocative rules when it comes to questions that they actually gonna ask you, be it in the exam or in the test. Okay, so just to give a brief summary of the allocative rules, we have 3 allocative rules in economic efficiency, which is rule 1, rule 2 and rule 3. So rule 1, it speaks about the marginal rate of technical substitution, and it says resources will be efficiently allocated when the marginal rate of technical substitution is actually equal between 2 products for any firm producing the products. So what does it mean? It just simply means that marginal rate of technical substitution has to be the same between actually 2 products that are produced by differentiated firms or by 2 firms, right? Then we move over to allocative rule 2. So allocative rule 2 speaks about the marginal product of labor, right? So with the marginal product, which is denoted as MPL, it says that resources will be efficiently allocated that when the marginal product of labor is actually the same between 2 firms for a production of a specific product. So for firms to produce a specific or a particular product, then the marginal product of labor between these 2 firms has to be the same, or it has to be equal, right? Then we move over to the third one, which is allocative rule 3. Allocative rule 3 speaks about the marginal rate of product transformation. It is mostly important to know which allocative rule speaks with what tool. For instance, what tool is actually the allocative rule speaking about in this case. So with allocative rule 3, it speaks about the marginal rate of product transformation, and it says firms should therefore operate for ensuring efficient allocation of resources. It just means that firms have to operate at the point where the marginal rate of product transformation between these 2 firms is actually equal, right? So to catch up, firstly we said allocative rule 1 speaks about the marginal rate of technical substitution. Allocative rule 2, it speaks about the marginal product of labor, which is denoted as MPL. And allocative rule 3 speaks about the marginal rate of product transformation, denoted as MRPT. Please bear in mind that you know which rule speaks about what and have the ability of then interpreting it when it comes to answering questions. So the theory part of this module is really important in order to actually assist you when it comes to now doing application. So without any waste of time, let's then start with activity 4. So activity 4 says the following paragraph, it deals with resource efficiency in terms of allocative rule 2, and you therefore have to ring the correct options. So allocation rule 2, it states that for an efficient allocation of labor, the MPL for firm 1, it should be higher than or lower than or equal to the MPL for firm 2. If the MPL for firm 1 is greater than the MPL of firm 2, then labor must be shifted from firm 1 or firm 2 to firm 1 or firm 2. This reallocation of labor will decrease or increase firm 2's output and decrease or increase firm 1's output, which will increase or decrease the MPL for firm 1. So this is allocative rule 2. And what did we say about allocative rule 2? We said that it actually says it assumes that marginal product of labor, it has to be the same between 2 firms for a production of a specific good, right? In this case, this is basically what I usually tell my student is reallocation of resources, right? We say that because we are assuming resource efficiency, we have to reallocate resources from where they are efficient to where they are inefficient. In this case, we say that if, let's say, for example, firm 1 output was actually lower than firm 2's output, what does that mean for firm 2? It means that since firm 2's output is greater than that of firm 1, firm 2 is actually efficient in utilization of its resources, and therefore we have to reallocate resources from where they are efficient to where they are inefficient. So it means in this case resources have to shift from firm 2 to firm 1 in order to actually be able to stimulate the growth, or rather the output of firm 1. So that is how reallocation of resources, and how we therefore ensure efficiency between those firms, because we said that marginal product of labor, it has to be the same between these two firms for a specific, for a production of a specific product. Right. So what did we say? We say that allocation rule 2 states that for an efficient allocation of labor, the marginal product of labor for firm 1, it should be then it should be equals to the marginal product of labor for firm 2, right? So that's just what the MPL stipulates. Okay. So I'm gonna highlight using green. So the correct answer, we say that the MPL for firm 2, it has to be equals to the MPL for firm 1, right? So moving over, right? So when we're moving over to the second scenario, which we say that if the MPL for firm 1 is greater than the MPL for firm 2, labor must be shifted from firm 1 or firm 2 to firm 1 or to firm 2. Like I explained, since I explained previously, I said that reallocation of resources, now that the MPL for firm 1 is greater than that of firm 2, it simply means that this is reallocation of resources, meaning that the resources of firm 2 have been much more efficient as opposed to the resources of firm 1, and the MPL for firm 1, remember we said that it has to be equivalent, or it has to be equals to that of firm 2, and that's the reason why then the resources have to be reallocated from firm 2 to firm 1 in order to be able to ensure efficiency between these two firms, right? And therefore we say that since the MPL for firm 1 is greater than the MPL for firm 2, then labor must be shifted from firm 2 to firm 1, right? So that is the correct answer here. So it's from firm 2 to firm 1, right? Okay. Now, this shift of actually labor obviously will have an effect on the output of firm 2, and it will also have an effect on the output of firm 1, as well as then the MPL for firm 1, right? Now, this reallocation of labor will decrease or increase firm 2's output. Now, let us assume that because obviously we said that labor has shifted from firm 2. So if we take experts, or rather employees who know how to do their work, who efficiently work to produce the huge amount of output in firm 2, and we take them, we replace them to actually in firm 1, or we rather put them in firm 1. What does it mean for firm 2? Obviously, for firm 2, we will experience a decrease in output. Why will the output decrease? It is actually decreasing because now we don't have experts in the job, meaning, for example, now firm 2 has to start actually training other people to fit in the position of the employees that have been taken from firm 2 to firm 1, and that directly affects the output, because now a new employee will not actually perform adequately or the same as the older employee, or rather the aspect in the job, used to perform, and hence then firm 2 output will decrease. However, firm 1 output will therefore going to increase, because if you have expert in the job, then it simply means that they will actually work within their boundaries, or within their given time, to produce large amounts of output. Then now, what does then this will cause in terms of the MPL? So the marginal product of labor for firm 1 will therefore decrease. What decreases it? We remember we have actually now added we took labor from here and we actually reallocated to firm 1, and obviously the marginal product of labor, because before we want to stimulate the output, so the marginal product of labor for firm 1 will therefore decrease, right? So that was all about activity 4. So now moving over to activity 5. Activity 5, again, it is still allocative rules when we look at it, and it is allocation rule 3, right? So we say assume the following figure relating to allocation rule 3, and you have to ring the correct options in the paragraph. Now you are given the marginal rate of product transformation as a tool actually that is utilized to assume efficiency in terms of allocation rule 3. So obviously firm 1, we have the MRPT. By just looking at this diagram, you can see that the amount of input units is actually the same for both firms, for firm 1 and firm 2 respectively. So we have 100 cell phones and 50 iPads for Fem 1, and the marginal rate of product transformation is 1:1. This ratio, what does it tell you in terms of the production of these two goods? Because these firms, this firm is producing two goods, and therefore we are actually utilizing allocation rule 3 in order to determine which product is the firm efficient and which product is the firm has to actually therefore specialize on, given its powers of production in this case. So we say the MRPT, which is 1:1 for this particular firm. What does it mean? It means actually it is 1:1. What do I mean by 1:1? It means for 1 unit of cell phone foregone, it actually gives out an additional unit in actually the iPads. So that simply means that if actually firm 1 sacrifices a 1 unit or 1 unit of actually producing cell phones, it would actually make an additional iPad in this case. So here obviously if we forgo 1 unit, it's going to be 99, and here the production of an additional iPad, it's going to be 51. So by just looking at this ratio, you can see that firm 1 therefore actually should specialize on iPads, because now it is actually producing an additional for every unit that it has foregone in cell phones. Now for firm 2, you can see that the marginal rate of product transformation is 2:1. So as it is 2:1, it means that every 2 units that are actually produced in this in cell phones, it means that a subtraction, or rather a sacrifice of 1 iPad. So that simply means here if it's 102, here it's going to be 49. By just looking at this, you can see that then firm 2 therefore has to specialize here, because it doesn't actually lose any resources, but instead it actually have additional it makes additional cell phones whenever they actually sacrifice producing the production of iPads. So here we're just testing, or rather looking at which product between the two each of these firms has to specialize on. So now if we get to answer the questions, according to the figure, productive efficiency can improve by having firm 1 to produce more of, because by just looking at this ratio, we can then say more of iPads and less of cell phones for firm 1, and firm 2 should produce more of, because by looking at this we can tell that firm 2 can actually produce more of cell phones and less of iPads, because now we're trying to determine which product a firm is actually strong, or rather it is effective at producing. However, if now this if this were to change, let's say now this is now firm 1 and now this is firm 2 in terms of this, so we would have firm 1 producing more of cell phones and less of iPads, and firm 2 actually producing more of iPads and less of cell phones. So what directs us? It's basically the marginal rate of product transformation between these two firms. So please take note of this. If let's say for example I were to change this and make firm 2 to become firm 1 and firm 1 to become firm 2, then this whole specialization in terms of which product should the firm produce more is therefore going to be determined by just you looking at this marginal rate of product transformation, or the ratios. So if, like I said, if then now you find that this is firm 1, it simply means because now it's sacrifice for a gain, therefore it simply means that firm 1 would be producing more of cell phones and less of iPads. And in this case, if this now becomes firm 2, then it simply means that firm 2 would therefore be producing less of cell phones and more of iPads. Now let's move over to the last one. Again, so activity 6, it says assume the following figure, and you also have to ring the correct option in the graph. So we are given this, it's a production possibility frontier, and we have necessities on the vertical axis and luxuries on the horizontal axis. So mathematically, you know that a slope of this curve is basically a change in y over the change in x, and a change in y is actually necessities, and a change in x, which is basically the luxuries. Now, the slope of the production possibility frontier, it shows how is it the luxury or the necessity output can be substituted for luxury or necessity output when the total resources are held constant. by actually looking at this graph. What did we say? On the vertical axis we have necessities, on the horizontal axis we have luxuries. If you move down the curve, you can see that luxuries are actually, you can see that if we're moving down this curve, we can actually see that the necessities, if you're moving downwards down those curve, you can see that the necessities output is actually substituted for luxury output, because when we move down here, we can see that there's more of luxuries that are being produced. So this slope of this curve, it actually tries to show us how actually the necessity output is actually substituted for the luxury output, right? When actually we're keeping the resources constant. Okay. Then we move over to the second part of it. Right. So moving to the second part of this, we say that according to the figure of the marginal rate of product transformation, an increase or decrease, according to the figure, marginal rate of product transformation increases or decreases as the luxury output increases. By just looking at this figure, what can we say? Remember, we said we take it back to the slope. We said that a change in y over the change in x, our y is change in necessities over the change in luxuries, right? By just looking at this, marginal rate of product transformation is basically the slope, so you don't have to be confused. So we say that what happens then to the slope when the luxury output is increasing? So if our denominator is increasing gradually as opposed to our numerator, we can actually therefore say that the marginal rate of product transformation is actually therefore gonna decrease, because obviously if then, let's say for example, we have 5 of necessities at the top, and we have, like, let's say about 5 and we have 100, that just genuinely actually decreases the marginal rate of product transformation. And simply because we say our slope is the one that is actually telling us that it's going to be a change in necessities over the change in luxuries. So if luxuries are much more gradually increasing as opposed to necessities, then the marginal rate of product transformation is going to decrease. Then we move over to the third question. The shape of the frontier indicates that increases in luxuries or necessities output eventually runs into increasing or decreasing returns. Because we say that when you're moving along this point, if this is any point on actually the production possibility frontier, it means it is efficient, attainable, and it is actually an allocation that is equivalent to each and any point. But by just moving down the curve, you can see that even if we were to assume actually in terms of isocos, if you were to assume that this is actually 100, this could be 100 also, this could be 100 in terms of looking at the return to scale graph. But by moving down the curve, you can see that the shape of the frontier is actually indicating the decreasing returns to returns to scale, although the luxury output keeps on increasing, but moving down the curve is actually on a decreasing returns to scale, right? Then we move over to the last question. It says the marginal rate of product transformation is equals to, now we're looking at it in terms of the slope. Remember I said a slope of this, because we have necessities and we have luxuries, there is a change in necessities over the change in luxuries. So that is the slope. Slope, mathematically we know it's change in y over the change in x, and therefore the slope in this case, which is the marginal rate of product transformation, it would be a change in necessities over the change in luxuries. Important. When now we talk about marginal cost and we talk about price ratios, this is completely a different notion. You cannot say the marginal cost is also going to be the exact same like this. So if we have the change in necessities over the change in luxuries as our marginal rate of product transformation, our price ratio is going to be the inverse of this. What do I mean by that? If we have MRPT being change in necessities over the change in luxuries, then our marginal cost will be equals to the marginal cost of luxuries over the marginal cost of necessities, and which will also be equals to the price of luxuries over the price of necessities. Let us assume if then here we had luxuries, and here we had necessities. In this case, obviously, it was going to, our MRPT was going to be a change in luxuries over the change in necessities. But now when it comes to the marginal cost and the price ratios, so the marginal cost, it was going to be then the marginal cost of necessities over the marginal cost of luxuries, which is also equals to the price of necessities over the price of luxuries. Please make sure that you fully comprehend this and you have the ability of actually deducing the difference between this. MRPT is equals to, you can say, change in Y over the change in X. What is on your Y axis is necessities over the luxuries, but it's a different logic when it actually comes to marginal cost and price ratios. So like I said, because this is a change in necessities over the change in luxuries, then it's going to be equals to, it's also the same as the marginal cost of luxuries over that of necessities. Right, so that was all for activity 4, 5, and 6. I hope you get a clarification of this and you fully comprehend it. If there is any further questions that you may have, feel free to ask, and also we are available in the group chat. You can always point out questions where you require much more assistance or you require further clarification. That was it from me. Until we meet again. Bye.